The ballroom of the Beverly Wilshire Hotel was exactly the kind of place that made people feel important just by walking through the door. It was the spring of 1973, and Hollywood was in one of those rare moods it occasionally got: generous, electric, full of itself in the best possible way. The chandeliers threw light across marble floors like scattered diamonds. Women in evening gowns drifted between tables. Men in black tuxedos laughed a little too loudly and drank a little too freely, the way powerful men always do when they're in rooms full of other powerful men and nobody has to pretend to be modest. This was a private industry gala, not a red carpet event with photographers and publicists managing every angle, but the kind of gathering that existed behind the public version of Hollywood, the real Hollywood, where deals were made with handshakes and grudges were settled over cocktails, and the real pecking order revealed itself in who held whose attention across a crowded room. There were producers at corner tables and directors leaning against bars and studio executives, circulating with the practiced ease of people who had never once in their lives stood against a wall waiting for someone to talk to them. There were actors, too, some of them legends, some of them on their way up, some on the quiet slide down that nobody talked about until after the fact. The entertainment for the evening was loose. There was a band playing standards on a low stage near the back of the room. There was a comedian who'd already done his 20 minutes and retreated gratefully to the open bar. And there was Dean Martin, who wasn't officially performing tonight, but who was Dean Martin, which meant that wherever he happened to be standing was essentially a stage. That was just how it worked with Dean. The air in the room smelled like expensive cologne and cigarettes, and the particular optimism that comes from being in a city where everyone is convinced they are one good meeting away from changing their life. It was a room full of confidence, a room full of people who believed in themselves completely. Not one of them, not a single one, had any idea what the next 2 hours would bring. Part 2, The King of Cool and what that title actually meant. To understand what happened that night, you have to understand who Dean Martin was. Not the legend. The legend is easy. Everyone knows the legend. The tuxedo, the glass in hand, the voice that sounded like it had been aged in oak barrels alongside the best bourbon in Kentucky. Everyone knows the effortless cool, the half-lidded eyes, the way he moved through rooms like gravity with suggestion he was politely declining to follow. But the legend doesn't tell the whole story. Dean Martin was born Dino Paul Crocetti in Steubenville, Ohio, the son of an Italian immigrant barber. He'd boxed as a kid, real boxing, dirty and hard, in the kind of amateur bouts where the purse was small and the risk was large. He'd worked steel mills. He'd run card games. He'd scratched and fought and maneuvered his way out of life that had no glamour in it whatsoever. And he'd done it through a combination of genuine talent, relentless work, and the kind of social intelligence that never announces itself because that would defeat the purpose. The carelessness was the act. The looseness was a performance. Dean Martin worked harder than almost anyone in the business, and he worked hardest at making it look like he never worked at all. By 1973, he was in his mid-50s, and he had nothing left to prove to anyone. He'd made 50 films. He'd released dozens of albums. He'd headlined Las Vegas more times than most people could count. He'd been half of one of the most famous comedy duos in American history, then walked away from it and built an entirely new career more successful than the first one. He'd done a weekly television variety show that ran for 9 years. He had an ease with an audience that was genuinely rare, the ability to make 500 strangers feel like they were sitting in his living room, like he'd known them for years, like the whole evening was just an extended conversation between friends. Dean was funny. He was quick. He had the instincts of a natural comedian. That particular gift for reading a room and finding the precise angle that would make it erupt. And he was cocky. Not meanly cocky, not aggressively cocky, but with the light, confident cockiness of a man who has been the most charming person in every room he has ever entered, who knows it, and who finds the whole thing mildly amusing. He was also, and this is important, physically bold. The boxing background never fully left him. He didn't look for trouble, but he didn't walk away from it either. And there was something in the way he carried himself that communicated this without words. Men who didn't know Dean sometimes made the mistake of reading the easygoing manner as softness. They usually only made that mistake once. That night at the Beverly Wilshire, Dean was in his element. glass in hand, surrounded by people who want to be near him, telling stories, trading quips with whoever wandered into his orbit, being Dean, which was the most natural thing in the world, and also, somehow, a masterpiece of constructed persona. He was the center of the room. He always was. And then someone walked in who didn't know that. Part 3, the stranger in yellow. He arrived without fanfare. That was the first thing people noticed afterward, that there was no announcement, no entrance, no moment of spectacle. He simply appeared near the edge of the room, and for a few seconds, he was just another face at a party. He was wearing yellow, not the subtle yellow of a pocket square or a tie, a full tracksuit, black striped canary yellow that stood out in a room full of black tuxedos the way a lit match stands out in a dark room. He was lean in a way that only comes from decades of absolute discipline, the kind of physical conditioning that doesn't shout but whispers in the way a person moves, the economy of motion, the way every step looks like it was decided on a quarter second before it needed to happen. He was 22 years old in his bones and 100 years old in his eyes, which is what genuine mastery does to a person. It ages certain parts of you while leaving others permanently young. His name was Bruce Lee. In the spring of 1973, Bruce Lee was not yet the global icon he would become. He was known in martial arts circles. He was respected in Hong Kong cinema. He had done the Green Hornet on American television, which had generated a devoted following, but hadn't made him a household name with the older Hollywood crowd filling this particular ballroom. Enter the Dragon was still in post-production, the cultural earthquake that would reshape how the entire Western world thought about martial arts, about Chinese cinema, about physical possibility. That was still a few months away. To most of the people in that room, he was an interesting-looking young man in an unusual outfit. He moved through the gathering with quiet confidence, speaking briefly with a few people, accepting a glass of water with a nod, watching the room with the attentiveness of someone who never fully turns the awareness off. Not because he was nervous, but because awareness was simply a habit so deeply installed it had become indistinguishable from breathing. Someone introduced him to a producer near the center of the room. They talked. The producer laughed at something Bruce said. Nearby, a small group drifted closer, drawn by that invisible magnetism that certain people generate without trying to. Dean Martin, 20 feet away, noticed the yellow outfit. He noticed the way the young man carried himself. And Dean, being Dean, felt a comedic opportunity the way a musician feels a chord progression, instinctively, immediately, irresistibly. He smiled, took a slow sip from his glass, and began moving in that direction. Part 4, Dean makes his move. The thing about Dean Martin's humor was that it was never cruel. That is an important distinction. He wasn't the kind of entertainer who found victims. He found situations, absurdities, contradictions, the natural comedy of life presenting itself, and he heightened them with perfect timing and zero malice. He also had an extraordinary gift for reading people quickly. He could usually tell within the first 30 seconds of conversation whether someone would play along, whether they had a sense of humor, whether the joke he was building toward would land or land wrong. He was almost never wrong about this. He walked over to where Bruce Lee was standing. "Excuse me," Dean said, his voice carrying that familiar mid-century warmth, the Ohio in it smoothed down by decades but never quite gone. He addressed the group broadly but was looking at Bruce. "I see we got a man over here dressed for a completely different party." Light laughter from the surrounding circle. Bruce looked at Dean with an expression of polite, curious attention. "I'm Dean Martin," Dean said, extending a hand. "Bruce Lee," Bruce replied, taking it. His handshake was measured. He looked at Dean with eyes that assessed quickly and completely. Dean tilted his head. "Now, I don't want to be rude," he said, with a theatrical air of a man about to be very slightly rude. "But that outfit, are you the entertainment? Because I've been here 3 hours, and frankly, whoever booked this party owes me a better show." More laughter. Bruce smiled, a small, genuine smile. "I do a little something," Bruce said. His English was precise, slightly accented, unhurried. Dean's eyes lit up. He turned to people around him like a comedian acknowledging his audience. "He does a little something," Dean repeated. "Ladies and gentlemen, the man does a little something." He turned back to Bruce. "What kind of something?" "Martial arts," Bruce said simply. Dean considered this. He took a sip of his drink. The crowd had grown, people gravitating toward the energy of the exchange the way they always do when Dean Martin is performing, which was always martial arts. Dean said thoughtfully, "So you're telling me, and stop me if I'm wrong here, you're telling me that if I took a swing at you right now, you could handle yourself?" Bruce looked at him calmly. "I wouldn't recommend taking a swing at me," he said. There was no aggression in it. It was stated the way you might state a fact about weather. Dean grinned. This was going beautifully. "See, now I don't know if that's a warning or an invitation," he said. "But I'll tell you what, I've got 30 pounds on you, easy. I boxed in my youth. I did some training." He rolled his shoulders loosely, playing up the bit, milking every ounce of comedy from the image of a 50-something Dean Martin in a tuxedo squaring up against this compact young man in yellow. "I feel like I could take you." The room laughed. Several people leaned forward. Bruce Lee looked at Dean Martin for a long moment. Something shifted very slightly in his expression. Not amusement exactly. Something quieter and more considered than amusement, like a chess player who has already seen 15 moves ahead and is deciding, with genuine patience, how slowly to reveal them. "Would you like a demonstration?" Bruce asked. Dean spread his hands generously. "By all means," he said. Part 5. The moment the room went silent. What happened next lasted approximately 4 seconds. For seconds that every single person in that ballroom remembered for the rest of their lives. Bruce Lee set down his glass. He rolled his neck once, loosely. He glanced briefly at the space around him. Ceiling height, floor surface, proximity of bystanders, in the practiced, unconscious way of someone for whom spatial awareness is as natural as blinking. And then he moved. The jump came from nothing. That was the only way to describe it afterward. It came from nothing. There was no warning crouch, no visible gathering of force, no telegraph preparation. One moment his feet were on the marble floor, and the next he was in the air, suspended at a height that should not have been possible for a human body to reach from a standing start. His right leg extended in a kick that stopped 1 inch from Dean Martin's left cheekbone. The champagne glass in Dean's hand sloshed. His eyes went wide. The room did not gasp. The room stopped. There is a difference. A gasp is a sound. What the room did was subtract itself entirely from the sonic landscape for a full 2 seconds. No conversation, no laughter, no clinking glasses, no shuffling feet. Just a distant band on the other side of the ballroom, suddenly very loud in the silence, playing something sweet and entirely oblivious. Bruce landed, feet together, perfectly balanced. He hadn't touched Dean. He hadn't come close to hurting Dean. But the controlled precision of the movement, the absolute mastery it represented, was so far outside what the room had been prepared to witness that every nervous system in the vicinity needed a moment to recalibrate. Dean Martin stared at him. His glass was still in his hand, tilted at a slight angle from the air displacement of the kick. The champagne was still moving against the side of the glass. Dean looked at the glass. He looked at Bruce. He looked at the spot in the air where the foot had just been. Slowly, with great deliberateness, he reached out and set the glass down on the nearest table. He looked at Bruce Lee for a long moment in the silence. Then Dean Martin did something nobody in the room expected. He laughed, not the practiced laugh of a performer working a crowd, not the polished, rhythmic laugh of Dean Martin the entertainer. A real laugh, surprised and genuine, the laugh of a man who has just been shown something genuinely extraordinary and has been caught completely, honestly off guard by it. "Okay," Dean said, and his voice was different now. The performance was gone. He was just a man standing in a room, talking to another man. "Okay, I was wrong. I cannot take you." The room erupted. Part 6. After the kick, 2 men face to face. They stepped away from the crowd together, almost by mutual unspoken agreement. A quieter corner near the windows, where the city lights of Los Angeles spread out below them like a circuit board that had decided to become beautiful. Dean poured himself a fresh drink. He offered one to Bruce, who declined with a slight shake of his head, and picked up his water glass again. "How long have you been doing that?" Dean asked. Since I was a child, Bruce said. Seriously training since I was 13. But the real work started later. Dean was quiet for a moment. He was looking at Bruce with a different quality of attention than he'd had 20 minutes ago. Not less friendly, more focused. Like a man who has recalibrated and is making sure he sees clearly now. I've been in this business my whole life, Dean said, since I was a kid working in smoky rooms in Ohio. And I've gotten pretty good at walking into a room and thinking I know what I'm dealing with. He paused. You made me look like a student. You made a reasonable assumption, Bruce said simply. He wasn't dismissive, but he wasn't comforting either. He was being honest. Yeah, Dean said. He smiled, and it was a real one, the kind that reaches the eyes and stays there. I assumed I was the most dangerous person in the room. That's a common assumption, Bruce said. People usually think danger looks a certain way. Loud, large, obvious. He glanced out at the glittering room behind them. Real capability is quiet. Dean turned this over. You know, I've been told I'm cocky my whole career, he said. I've always thought of it as confidence. There's a difference, I'll argue. But tonight, he laughed softly. Tonight it was just cocky. Bruce looked at him. The difference, he said, is whether you've done the work. There was no judgment in his voice. It was simply an observation, clean and clear, the way facts tend to be when someone isn't trying to use them as a weapon. Dean was quiet for a moment. Then he extended his hand again. I'm going to remember this conversation, Dean said, and I'm going to tell this story. You understand that? I'm absolutely going to tell this story. Bruce took his hand. The smile was back, genuine and warm. I hope you do, he said. Part 7, The Night That Echoed. Dean Martin told the story for the rest of his life. He told it at dinner parties and on talk shows and backstage in Las Vegas when the conversation turned to moments that surprised him. And there was something the way he told it that made people understand it had genuinely moved him. Not just amused him, not just provided a good anecdote, but actually moved him. He always described it the same way. The yellow, the stillness before the movement, the 4 seconds, the glass that sloshed, the 1 inch of separation between that extended foot in his face, and the absolute unquestionable certainty that if Bruce Lee had wanted that foot to land, it would have landed, and there would have been nothing Dean could have done about it. I walked over there thinking I was a room. Dean would say, and he showed me, without saying a single unkind word, that I was just a man in a room. He was never embarrassed by this telling. That was the thing that surprised people. In an era and an industry full of men who would have quietly buried such a story to protect their pride, Dean Martin retold it with something close to gratitude, because what he'd gotten that evening was a gift, even if it arrived in the form of a flying kick aimed at his left cheekbone. He'd gotten a reminder that the world is full of extraordinary things wearing unassuming appearances. That mastery doesn't always announce itself. That the person you dismiss as a background figure in someone else's evening might be, in fact, one of the most remarkable human beings alive, carrying inside a slender frame and a yellow tracksuit the accumulated discipline of 20 years of absolute dedication. He'd gotten a reminder that confidence is earned, that it has to be rooted in something real and continuously tended to, and that the moment you stop earning it is the moment it quietly becomes the other thing, the hollow thing, the performance of confidence stripped of its substance. Dean Martin was a man who respected competence above almost everything else. He'd earned his own credentials the hard way, in boxcar venues and small clubs before anyone knew his name, and he never forgot that the ease came after the work, never before it. Bruce Lee, standing in a Beverly Hills ballroom in yellow tracksuit, had shown him a level of earned competence so far beyond ordinary that it stopped a room of several hundred Hollywood professionals cold. That commanded something from Dean. It commanded recognition. Later, when Enter the Dragon opened later that same year and Bruce Lee became the international phenomenon that those who knew him had long understood he would become, Dean would watch the film in a private screening and sit quietly afterward for a long time. He told a friend, I knew from a moment I set my glass down. Bruce Lee died on July 20th, 1973, just weeks before Enter the Dragon's release. A tragedy that stunned the world and robbed of a talent that had barely begun to show what it was capable of. He was 32 years old. He had been making films seriously for less than a decade. When Dean heard the news, he was quiet for a long time. He told the story again that night to a small group of friends, his voice lower than usual. I walked up to that kid thinking I was going to make the room laugh. Dean said. He made the whole room stop breathing instead. And then he shook my hand and talked to me like I hadn't just made a complete fool of myself. He paused. That's class. That's rare, serious class. He looked down at his glass. I never told him how much that conversation stayed with me. Dean said quietly, I wish I had. There's a version of that night where Dean Martin gets the last laugh. The charming quip, the gracious exit. The story told entirely as a comedy of errors, pure entertainment, nothing more. That version exists. Dean was capable of telling it that way. But the version he told most often, the one that surfaced when he was being honest rather than entertaining, ended differently. It ended with a man standing at a window with a glass of water he wasn't drinking, talking about mastery with the unhurried certainty of someone who had spent his entire life genuinely earning the right to be in the rooms he occupied. It ended with Dean Martin, who had never been humbled easily or often, admitting quietly and completely that he had been wrong. It ended with respect. Real respect. The kind that doesn't need an audience. That night at the Beverly Wilshire, Dean Martin walked over to make a joke about a stranger in a yellow tracksuit. He walked away knowing he had just spoken with one of the most extraordinary human beings the 20th century would produce. He didn't know it was Bruce Lee. But in the end, that was exactly the point. Greatness doesn't wait for you to recognize it. It simply is what it is at all times, in all rooms, whether you're ready to see it or not. And on one spring evening in 1973, with a chandelier overhead and the city spread out below and champagne fizzing in a glass, nobody was drinking anymore. Dean Martin got ready. 1 inch. For seconds. The rest of a lifetime spent telling the story. That's worth remembering.